Okay, I think we'll get going. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you guys all had a good lunch. My name is Frederick Tesfaye, and we're here in the session on leveraging finance for low-carbon mobility and the role of national development banks. So while people are still coming in, one of our panelists will be speaking in French. So we have these earpieces. You can pull them out, choose your channel on the devices, and be able to listen in and take full part in this session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the session and what we're doing, and also the panelists that we have here at the table. And what we're doing today, it's a little bit different. We're trying to have just a discussion on how national development banks can leverage finances from bilateral development banks specifically for urban transport. And we have an interesting mix of institutions. So closest to the ground over here, we have somebody from the Urban Transport Authority in Senegal. We have a representative of National Bank of Colombia. And over here, we have two bilateral development banks from AFD and KfW. So these are two very large EU bilateral development banks who have strong climate mandates and are key members of the Mobilize Your City partnership. And we'll get back to that in a second. And then we have the FDN, which is the National Development Bank of Colombia. And finally, CETUD, which is the Transport Authority in Dakar. And we brought this together. I'm representing MYC, so greetings to everybody here and also online. And MYC works to empower cities in Africa, Asia, Latin America, as well as Eastern Europe to transition for future-facing urban mobility. So what does that mean? They go into the cities to strengthen the capacities of the urban transport departments, develop sustainable projects through sustainable urban transport plans, national urban transport plans, as well as facilitate access to finance within these cities. So as we look to the shift for low-carbon mobility, we find the question how to leverage these funds and how national banks can actually piggyback off these bilateral banks to really make a bigger impact. And as I've learned is that most national banks do focus on many issues, infrastructure and social issues, but transport is also not always the main focus. And we got to find ways to implement this together with these transport agencies. And today we want to create a space to talk about experiences, learning what the strengths are from the development banks and how the bilateral banks work together coming into countries, especially in the global south where we work. So proud to introduce the audience. Maybe I could just get started over here. To my left, I have Barbara Schnell. She's the Director of Sector Policy at the KfW Bank in Frankfurt. She's been with KfW since 2001 on various positions, international projects and export finance, as well as corporate strategy and development finance. Now she's heading the the sector for transport, the sectoral department, and been in other places such as JP Morgan and the Dresdner Bank in New York and Frankfurt. Over to my further left with Stefan Kras, Deputy Head of Transport and Mobility Division in the French Development Agency, named AFD. And he has been with them for over 15 years, working in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and before that in the French Ministry of Transport. So, very experienced side over here. And to my right, I have Diego Fernando Romero Alvarez, who is the Head of Capital Markets from the, I'm not even going to try to say how I say the bank in Spanish, but the National Development Bank of Colombia, FDN. And all the way to my right is Gora Sar. Oh, sorry. He's also 15 years of experience, development of financial products and new markets. He's a strategist and passionate about innovation and development of products and structures within the bank to impact the growth of the country. And all the way to my right here, Gora Sar, he is working with CETUD, which is the Executive Council of Urban Transport of Dakar, and has over 10 years of engineering experiences designing and managing infrastructure projects, and is now responsible for the BRT Dakar project. So I'm happy everybody's here. Thank you for listening, and we're just going to get started with a little bit of a conversation and go from there. So let's just jump into it. First question is over for you. The KfW has a very interesting history, and it's a national development bank promoting transition towards sustainable development within Germany itself, as well as a bilateral development bank working with partner countries around the world. So my first question would be to you about Germany is, how do you leverage the finance for sustainable low carbon mobility to support Germany's national policy objectives?
Yeah, thank you, Frederick, for this nice introduction. Yeah, just to give you a little bit of an image about KfW, our origin is actually with the Marshall Plan for Europe. So this year we celebrate our 75th anniversary. A range of festival parties and celebration will come up. So we are committed to implementing German economic policy, by committing our funds to programs which cover various areas such as energy efficient housing, small and medium enterprises, student loans, and also financing of infrastructure for municipalities. And one of our key strengths, which we put to use, is our credit rating. Again, in 2022, KfW was declared as the world's safest bank by the US magazine Global Finance, and I think we've held this position for a number of years now. And we rely on a AAA rating and the German government's credit standing here, and therefore we have access to capital markets at favorable conditions, and we can pass this on to our partners and clients in Germany and also globally. So with our favorable funding, we support German national policy objectives, and part of that is promoting low carbon and sustainable infrastructure, also encompassing low carbon mobility. And in our domestic business, we provide, for example, promotional loans for municipalities to finance smart city digital technologies, as well as non-motorized transport infrastructure. And we provide private households with grants and for installing wall boxes for e-vehicles. So it's a range of activities we have here. And also we promote SMEs and innovative startups in developing low carbon technologies. So as you said, we are also in charge of financial cooperation on behalf of the German government. So that's about a tenth of the overall commitments of KfW. And we also support urban transport initiatives around the globe in our partner countries on behalf of the German government, the Ministry for Financial Cooperation and Development. And in 2022, we committed around 800,000 euros for this particular purpose. And that's for sustainable transport projects. And I can mention a couple of examples later on in the conversation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Interesting. So now I'd like to go over to Diego here to understand your place in the domestic lending and financial landscape. And in this development architecture, what special niche an NDB has?
Okay, thank you, Frederick. Thank you for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in this panel, in this important discussion. FDN is a national development bank focused on structural and financing infrastructure, but it's a quite different bank. I mean, our shareholders are the Colombian government, IFC, CAF, that is the Latin American Development Bank, but also SMBC, that is a private bank. So our role is how we can close the gaps and how we can make possible the structural and financing projects in Colombia. We focus on infrastructure, as I said, in big projects like roads, airports, ports, but also in electric mobility, social infrastructure like hospital and schools. And we think that the idea is how we can bring more money, more investors to the country, because we understand that infrastructure is a quite potential asset to create impact in the society. but also to create value for the investor. So our idea is how we can create the good conditions, how we can create the environment, the legal framework to make possible this investment. And we made this like providing direct lending to the projects, but also to create and promote standards, also creating and offering products that the traditional banks or the commercial banks can offer. For example, we can provide liquidity lines, we can provide guarantees. And the idea, as I said, is how we can hedge those risks, that make it difficult to implement a project in Colombia. So in Colombia and in general in the region. So that's the idea, how we can collaborate to have a better environment for this kind of investment in our country.
Okay, thank you. I have another follow-up question for you. How do you as a national development bank help meet SDG targets and nationally determined contributions, how to put them into implementation?
SDG and NDC are now part of our goal. You understand that when you are working with infrastructure, there are many impacts that you need to reduce. And now understand that NDCs and SDGs is our responsibility. So we are working, creating standards, working also creating the right structure of the project, because we understand that if you want to finance a project, you have to create a correct structure. You need to allocate correctly the risk. Also, you need to create a good payment structure. And regarding NDCs and SDGs, also we are promoting new elements and new standards in the regulation. And we are offering products that make possible these projects. So we understand that some projects that have so many risks need to have the help of the national development banks in order to make possible the financing of the project. So our role is, as I said, is how we make possible these projects. And it doesn't matter if it's a highway, electric buses project. We understand that SDGs is now not just a restriction, but more like an opportunity for different investors. So as I said, we're creating the environment to make possible these projects, to implement the standards that let us know that will help us to comply with the NDCs of the country. And this is our role, how we can help the different investors and the different stakeholders to make possible these projects.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to hear the things happening on the ground and really how you do things within your country. Let's take a step back now to AFD, how you guys work, and more specifically on sustainable transport. You've been a major partner of Mobilize Your City since its creation, and I really want to understand why it's so interesting for you as a bank to support these sustainable urban mobility plans.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you, Frederick. We are not here to advertise on AFD, but we are here more on Mobilize Your City umbrella. Just some words anyway. On AFD, as Frederick said, we are the French bilateral agency, bilateral bank. We are working in 120 countries, something like that. We approved last year 12 billion euros of financing, both to public and to private sector. Mobility and transport represented almost 2 billion and almost 3 billion from 2017 to 2071. Most of this money has climate co-benefits, and around 60% of this money is aiming at reducing gender inequalities. And more than 50% on our mobility portfolio is for urban mobility, which is growing. So AFD has been promoting sustainable mobility since a long time, meaning green and low carbon mobility, but not only. And I would like to say that efficient and long-term mobility systems, inclusive mobility systems, safe for all solutions are key. So we love words such as just transition, reasonable sizing of the projects, affordable projects for the users, for public finance, climate change adaptation. We often talk on mitigation, but adaptation is also key. Road safety, gender balance, all those words are key. So yes, well, MYC initiative has been created just after COP21 in 2015 in Paris, and since then AFD and some other donors are very supporting of MYC, and I think today we can say that MYC is a great success. You can go to MYC website, very easy to find. Today there are 500 documents, case studies, workshops, guidelines, and so on. Today about 100 cities are members of MYC and 10 national governments. So keywords of MYC, I would say, are planning, diagnosis, public vision, objectives, action plan, setting up priorities, and participatory process is crucial for establishing those mobility plans. They must be elaborated by the local authorities and not by a donor like us. So today, those mobility plans, some are achieved, some are ongoing, and they are very numerous in Africa, but also in Asia, in Latin America, thanks to European Union, EU, thanks to the German GIZ and AFD financing. So yes, we support very strongly MYC. MYC in particular contributed to elaborate international standards for those urban mobility plans, and you can find standard guidelines for these SUMs which have just been released. I would say that this planning methodology is a very crucial step in elaborated sustainable projects. The further ones, pillars, I would say, are working also in regional cities, and not only regional capitals, and not only in capitals, addressing paratransit, very interesting session this morning, integrating mass transit and active modes, and promoting innovation. And that is exactly what we all do with KfW, with some other ones, with EU, in Dakar, with the CETUD, and with the World Bank, who is hosting us all. So to conclude, I would say that the stake today is perhaps how to move forward from planning, which is key, as I said, to implementation of the project. We all know that this is the tricky part of the job.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a lot of planning discussions and thinking about what's happening. So now taking MYC, we have an sustainable urban mobility plan. How can AFD as a bilateral bank support national development banks, and what do they have to offer to really make a difference? You got to turn it on.
Okay, sorry again, it's me again. Not too long, I hope so. Well, we just spoke on sustainable mobility, and I really think that those national banks already play a great role, as Diego said, and I think we must encourage even stronger cooperation between all of us. First, I would say at a very political level regarding AFD that my CEO is pushing an international initiative called FIX, F-I-C-S, Financial Income Solutions, and the Secretariat of FIX is hosted by AFD, and the purpose is that FIX gathers more than 500 public development banks around the world. 20% are in Africa, 30% are in Asia, so not only in Europe, not only in America. And those public development banks are making what I could say the last mile banking. They are doing the last mile banking a real reality. And they mostly operate at national level and subnational level. Second, after these political words, some technical financial perspectives from AFD. Well, since a long time, we are trying to diversify our financing mobilities. Historically, we provided what we call sovereign loans to states. We also provided some grants, including from our colleague from EU. But since 15, 20 years, we try to diversify because sometimes we cannot provide financing to the states. So we are providing what we call non-sovereign loans, meaning to public entities without the guarantee of the state. So the aim is to expand the possibility of financing. And in transport sector, it is particularly key. We are doing that in the port sector, in air sector, but we have to say also that today in the urban mobility sector, it's much more difficult because it's difficult to find public entities capable to reimburse us, and sorry to say that. So we had the question how to address that, how to multiply the financing. And NDBs, I think, have a key role to play in that. Because when we lend to NDBs, when we work with NDBs, first we can partner with new actors, such as FDN, such as some other ones. We can share experiences, we can share objectives, we can build partnerships. And through those intermediary loans, we can reach out new actors we cannot reach if we don't do that. And I think in transport it's really key because sometimes, or more often, most often, we cannot lend directly to cities. We cannot lend directly to urban transport operators. If I take an example, in e-mobility, electric mobility, we are talking a lot on this these days. But the key thing is that, as you all know, electric buses are twice more expensive. How to address this gap, how to finance this? So one of the possibilities is to lend to national development banks, and we are doing that with FDN in Colombia. And then the NDBs can lend some money locally to operators or to cities. And to conclude on that, on the importance of the MDBs, I can just mention some examples from AFD. For example, we can prepare projects together. We set up a facility for that with the BNDES, which is the Brazilian Development Bank. We are providing a soft financing to the National State Bank in Costa Rica, BNCR, to support electric mobility. And finally, I would mention DBSA, the South African bank, which was here this morning. We partner with DBSA, which is local, regional, continental bank, I would say in Africa, very important. We are partners since 30 years, and we provided 8 credit lines for more than 400 million. We are financing capacity building funds. So this showed the very importance of those banks. And to the end, I could mention also Turkey, another country. We are lending money to İlbank, and İlbank then is financing projects, is dozens and dozens on cities. So we have one partner, and then the impacts, we hope, is very high.
Okay, sounds like innovation in banking. Thank you. So we're going to shift over now to Sedut. Just again, for those that came in a little bit later, he's going to be answering in French, so you could take your earpiece out to hear his answers when you guys are ready. And in the back, that's sitting on the chairs, you guys need to plug in the cord, turn it on, and put it on English to be able to understand. So, Gora, I wanted to talk to you about Dakar, and I've learned that they are leading transition on sustainable urban mobility. You guys are doing a lot of things, and many infrastructure projects are happening there, but also deeper reforms. So just for you guys all to put it into perspective, in Dakar, 70% of all trips are taken by foot completely during the weekdays, and so the remaining 30% of those 30%, 80% of these trips are made by public transport. So there's a really important factor that mobility and public transport can play, and this is where Mobilize Your City has been working on these sustainable mobility plans together with AFD and KfW. Will be actually doing actual financing of these activities. So I have a few questions for you, but maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your experiences and how mobility planning is important.
Okay. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the assistance. Thank you to all of the organizers. Thank you to those who have been working on transportation projects in Dakar. Thank you for working on creating regulations for public transportation. We have been working on this in order to secure public transportation in Dakar. And it is in doing this that CETUD was created, and it has been, Dakar suffers from a great deal of traffic congestion and urban planning that was not in balance with our mobility needs or with our mobility policies. So we deal with quite a bit of traffic issues. We also have been working to create a transportation authority for Dakar. So this was at the foundation of many reforms that are including some different laws that we have been implementing. They have a great deal of importance with regards to our urban transportation policies. And with these reforms and these new laws, we were able to launch a first important project that was the professionalization of urban transportation in the informal sector, because we realized that the informal sector represented a significant player in urban transportation. And so we wanted to professionalize these different actors. We wanted to make this a more professional transportation. So this started in 2005. And then we were also able to move into renewing the automobile fleet. We knew that this was you have an idea, this gave us an image of what urban transportation looked like, so we were able to develop a financing mechanism that we worked with the World Bank in order to move forward to renewal of these different vehicles. So this gives you a bit of an idea of our first steps in terms of professionalization, and we worked, it was about 14 GIEs, and then we also worked with the AFTU. AFTU are associations that work on renewing and updating our fleet and all of the different vehicles of public transportation in Dakar. So we worked with all of these actors. We've been working for about 25 years in this sector. And this has allowed us to really improve the level of the public transportation services in Dakar. We have also looked at some structural projects. The Bus Rapid Transit project, for example, this was identified in our plans for urban mobility. We looked at this in 2008, and we developed this plan, and this was something that allowed us to study mass transit networks for the future, and we were able to study this. These studies were financed through a PACMUR program, which was a program to improve urban mobility and transportation in Dakar. This allowed us to carry out these studies and to structure a mass transit project. Currently, we have the work and the construction that is already being done on this, and we have over a fleet of 158 buses that is able to transport 300,000 travelers per day. So that's our pilot project. We have also the restructuring project, which is to work on collective restructuring in Dakar. We have recently received financing from AFD, KfW, BIE, and other groups, and that has allowed us to work in the urban mobility sector. We have carried out baseline studies that have allowed us to structure and develop this project that is working on express trains, regional express trains, and other train lines. Through these different projects, we have been able to, with the support of Mobilize Your City and with AFD funding, we have been able to carry out planning studies to look at mobility plans in Dakar. And so this has been to look at some of the other effects in Dakar and in close by cities. So this has been part of the studies that we have carried out as part of the initiative with Mobilize Your City.
So today there is a whole series of structuring projects that are now being implemented and that were the basis for our planning. So what can I add? Seeing how significant the planning documents are, I think that these are the basis. If we do not have planning documents, then we cannot articulate them with the other economic development policies, which is why having this initiative here and therefore having planning documents that will allow us to structure our projects that can meet our development goals was very important. And I believe that planning allows us to have some tools that enable us to implement a series of programs to improve our transportation system and to curb greenhouse gas emissions. This is also extremely important. I would like to remind you that in the context of the BRT project, we used electric materials. We went full electric for the BRT project, and to restructure our grid, we moved toward gas, and this is because the planning documents were complying with the state policy for the environment. This is what I can say for the role of CETUD and our structuring projects and the significance of these initiatives that are funded by AFD, KfW, and others for the creation of planning documents for urban mobility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very impressive. I still have a few questions for you, but I really do understand all this work that you've done. I understand that's really helped you attract the finance. If you can just sum it up in one sentence, what have been your main successes and what was particularly challenging for you?
What was most important to us was to obtain funding. That is a very significant aspect. The challenge is to be able to fund our studies because we have projects, we identify projects, but we do not have a team beforehand. And so this initiative that allowed us to have funding, well, having funding was a major challenge. And I can explain how the projects were brought into this. For example, look at the BRT project. We used it to study the restructuring study. And so via this restructuring project, we are expecting to fund other projects. So funding the preparatory studies to then structure project is a major challenge. And that has allowed us to go forward for this planning document part. And then there is another window, which is institutional and financial restructuring. And one of the major elements that have been very useful to us is to be able to organize the informal sector. Organizing the informal sector was very helpful. It allowed us to attract funding so they could participate in our structuring project. Let me give you an example. The BRT project was a way for the local operators and the project society to collaborate, and this is a major challenge, but professionalization really was the foundation for all this work to improve the urban transportation sector in Dakar.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So it's very interesting to really hear from everybody how important the planning and the preparatory work is. Now we want to dive a little bit deeper to understand the leveraging the roles, how to leverage the finances, and really where Mobilize Your City has identified the financing gaps for implementation of these measures. So the support of the professionalism of paratransit, as you've already explained, it supports in the building of infrastructure for walking and cycling. Now over to KfW, can you imagine a structure that can actually finance SMEs and really get the money to them to upgrade their vehicles?
Yeah, so maybe in order to get to your question, what we consider a vital role for national development banks is to serve as an intermediary for our favorable funding for truly local projects. And that could very well be projects around integrating paratransit into the urban mobility system, which is optimized by doing the necessary planning, using Mobilize Your City. And it could also be walking and cycling infrastructure, which is truly local. So this is kind of different from, well, where we see the key strengths of large infrastructure projects where the multilateral development banks can play off their key strengths. No? So you mentioned the bus rapid transit system. So there's a nice way of complementing all of our different financing capacities in order to contribute to an integrated urban mobility system. So we as KfW, as a national development bank, we are a natural partner for national development banks in our partner countries to conceive these programs. And now to your question, yes, we have a couple of examples also where we support companies in modernizing their fleet. One of them is in Mexico, actually, in the area of, with our partner, the Mexican bank NAFIN. We helped with a promotional loan for a promotional program for micro and small and medium enterprises to replace old fuel or diesel-driven cars by electric vehicles. And another example is in South Africa with the partner bank DBSA, which was already mentioned. They actually replaced the public transport buses from diesel to biogas and LNG with the help of our funding. And we have our subsidiary DEG, and which is a sister company of Propaco in France, and they are very specialized in supporting private companies in our partner countries when they have respective investment needs. We usually go via the public sector or National Development Bank to reach out to these companies, and DEG can do so directly. But there is a couple of ways to reach out to these clients in order to contribute to the transformation of the mobility sector in that regard.
Okay, Barbara, thank you. So now over to AFD, and to really understand the learnings from MYC and AFD and your experiences on paratransit in particular, and how to get support from the national development banks that you're working with, and to set up funds for paratransit, something like that. Just like to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Frederick. I don't know if I have the answer on the role of NDBs on setting up a fund for paratransit, for decarbonizing paratransit, for supporting paratransit, but probably it's an area where we should work in the coming months or years, I think. I'm glad actually that we talk on paratransit in a session dedicated to leverage finance. I cannot summarize all what we know on paratransit. Please refer to the session this morning, moderated by our friend Sergio, who is here from the European Union, and please refer to the paratransit day tomorrow. What I just can say that I think we all know now that paratransit is absolutely key in a urban transport system towards sustainable mobility. First, I would say for socially aspects, meaning we have to support the operators. Don't forget the drivers who have horrific conditions of life. And paratransit is also key to ensure the success of the mass transit projects and for climate mitigation, of course. So what is doing MYC? MYC is doing many things on paratransit. Once again, MYC worked on some guidelines, some case studies, very recently in Cape Town, in Dakar, in Kigali, Rwanda, to better understand this subsector, how it's working, what are the financial flows, what are the key actions between stakeholders. And you can find on MYC website a very recent paratransit toolkit, which is very useful. So I think now bilateral donors, multilateral donors, NDBs can and should capitalize on this material. Capitalizing means, for me, working from soft considerations, once again, to hard investment. Let me give very quickly some example from AFD. We see that KfW already works on paratransit a lot, and we are together sometimes. We in Yaoundé, in Cameroon, we are working on paratransit. Initially, we were working on a very infrastructural project, but we are working with paratransit stakeholders for the design of stations and so that the local authorities take in consideration those stakeholders. And GIZ under EU financing also will work a lot on this paratransit in Yaoundé. We are working on a BRT in Nairobi, and AFD is mobilizing 5 million euros to support paratransit. In Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, for a BRT project also, and for, as mentioned, for the bus restructuring project in Dakar. We work on upgrading F2 lines, if I may say so, and we are with KfW, with EU, with EIB, with World Bank, working on those issues. So I would say, to go further, to conclude, I would say that once again, it's a very interesting proposal to see how we can work with those NDBs to support paratransit, because paratransit, they are local stakeholders, very local, and we have to know very local specificities. And in my sense, I think that NDBs are even more than us, of course, are now the local context. So I think we will gain a lot in working with those NDBs on this paratransit topic, which is key.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to take a little bit of a shift here. We've been talking about buses and BRTs and paratransit, but the most low-carbon solution for mobility is cycling and walking. And my question first on this side would be really to understand how can we get, or how can you find ways to support NDBs to get them to actually invest in walking and cycling?
Well, the encouraging news is that there are already examples in our portfolio. So we've started to work on cycling infrastructure in South Africa, and more recently also in Latin America, in Bogota, and also in Peru. So I think the news has been spread that this is a very, very useful addition to an urban mobility system. And of course, certain preconditions have to be met. People need to feel safe using the bicycle in that urban environment. And it needs to be culturally acceptable to also use the bicycle. And therefore, again, this can only be discussed, elaborated with local stakeholders, with the help of the municipal authorities as well as the national development banks, in order to find out where it makes sense. But we have started to fund this. It's a rather small and modest part of our portfolio, also given the size of the investments needed in comparison with heavy infrastructure. But I think this will be a growing trend in a lot of partner countries.
Okay, same question over to you.
D'accord, même question.
What to say better than Barbara? I would say that for me, of course, we all know active mode, which is essential for green and inclusive mobility. This is the title of this transforming transportation event. Sorry. I think over the years, this topic is even more important in the donors' work, but also in our borrowers' work, I would say. Perhaps some years ago it was difficult. So I think it's going better and better. I think also it remains very challenging. Even if we think about it, when we lend, for example, 50 million or 100 million, it's not difficult normally to have 1 million or 2 or 3 dedicated to pedestrians and to cycling. But I think it remains challenging anyway. Regarding Mobilize Your City, once again, you can go again to their website. More than 70 documents are specifically dedicated to active modes, so please refer. It's really a priority. I can mention also the Euroclima Plus program financed by EU. Mainly, it's a sister program of Mobilize Your City in Latin America and Caribbean countries. And under this program, KfW is financing project. We, AFD, are financing project. I could mention 2 dedicated to cycling. One in La Paz, Bolivia, where we are financing bicycle lanes, and in Puebla, Mexico, we are financing a bicycle park at a BRT terminal. So this is long projects, but I think dedicated project, which is important. We, AFD, we are financing through a grant, 10 million euro grant, just ongoing, a project in Madagascar dedicated to pedestrians in Tana, the capital. So definitely, I think we have all to systematically talk on active modes with our counterparts when we are financing urban mobility projects. I would say it's low cost for major impacts, if I may say so. And once again, I think it's very local mobility, I would say. So once again, I think we would gain to work with all the national development banks on that topic.
Okay, please try hard, keep going. This sounds
every day.
Very good. Okay, so back over to the FDN. You're the main lender of electric buses in Colombia, specifically Transmilenio and others, which is really amazing, and things that are going on there are really, world-leading in a lot of things. I'd really like to ask you what lessons you can share about your experiences and what challenges would be faced when copying this in other municipalities from your perspective.
Okay. Yeah, last year and in the last 2 years, we financed more than 600 buses, electric buses in the city of Bogota. And this was possible because we have a correct project in terms of structuring, yeah, and also because the project has correct risk allocation. I mean, when you need to attract investor for financing a project, you need to have the correct financial structure. You need to have the correct payment source, because we understand that if you are introducing a new technology like EV buses, there are so many risks that traditional investors are not willing to take. So in this situation, it's great to have collaboration with AFD, with KfW, because we can create the perfect solution, mixing our capabilities and their capabilities to offer the market a good and a correct financial solution. Another important point is regarding smaller cities, because Bogota is a big city with huge needs, with an important credit risk. But when you are trying to copy this same model to a small city with different needs and also with different credit risks, it's important to have another products or another elements to mitigate those risks. For example, when you have fiscal restrictions, also when you have technical restrictions, you need to attract funding, to attract technical assistance to create from the beginning the correct project. So in this sense, when we're working with these guys, we can create blending finance solutions. And this blending finance solution is not just for the financing of the project. I think that the blending finance solution starts from the beginning, from structuring a correct project, because if you invest in the structuring stage, you are going to have less problems and less cost in the financing and in the operating stage. So for me, it's how we can collaborate with the different stakeholders of the market, each one putting their strengths, each one putting products, each one facing different risks. And this could help to replicate a good solution that we put in place in Bogota and to transfer to other cities in Colombia. So this is our role, as I said, how we can offer solutions and how we can crowding in, inviting different investors, because I think this is an opportunity for the different parts. I mean, it's an opportunity for the multilateral banks, for the national banks, for the private investor, and for sure it's an opportunity for the community.
Yeah, perhaps just one word on this. I think that this example of electric mobility in Colombia is a perfect example on how we can work together. And with public key, stakeholders and private stakeholders. Proparco, the private subsidiary of AFD, has provided loans to Electribus, private bus concessions in Colombia, which bought electric buses. And hopefully, very soon, we will sign with FDN, AFD, the public AFD, a loan which will allow then to FDN, because FDN is a key player in Colombia, then to lend money to private operators so that they can buy electric buses. I think it's a very, very good example of our common collaboration, all of us.
Yeah, thank you. In that case, Proparco offer along with a concessional rate. So it made possible to finance the project. I mean, in that operation, FDN put like the 60% of the resources, and Proparco like the 40%. And at the end, we have like a blended rate that made possible the financing of around 400 electric buses. So the idea is how we can replicate this transaction in different cities or in different projects, not just in electric mobility, but in other sectors.
Okay, sounds interesting. So we're coming to the end of the session. I got 2 questions left to you guys that I would say directed towards bilateral development banks. And so to Situd, what would you need to help further reform your paratransit sector?
Before I answer this question, I would like to talk a bit about the collaboration between the private and public sectors. In Senegal, we also have some instruments that have been put into place to facilitate this kind of funding. So we have the National Development Bank that was created and works closely with different actors. I would also like to remind you that in the BRT project, we had about $212 million that is coming from the private sector. If we are able to have a robust institutional structure, then we can encourage the different sectors to participate. And that has been with the assistance of the IFC. So that has been very important. Also, when we're looking at the fund for the development of urban transportation, we had different delegations of that called for entrepreneurship. These were different local instruments that allowed us to draw more support to the urban transportation sector. And all of this was possible because we knew that we needed to anticipate the integration of private sector partners in the urban mobility. For example, electric mobility and electric transportation was something that we could work on with this kind of funding and with these partnerships. Today, one of the important elements to support urban transportation sectors, particularly informal sectors, is a question of funding. Funding is an extremely important element, but it's funding throughout the structuring and also professionalization. So this is work that is not easy, and the fact that we have funding and that we are able to work with partners like Mobilize Your City, that we have support for funding of the planning documents in organization of the sector. This has really allowed us to boost other kinds of funding. So once these or if these preconditions are not met, then it is very difficult to find further funding. So that is why today the Senegalese government is putting everything, every effort into creating appropriate conditions, into building a favorable environment for the evolution of urban transportation so that we can acquire and attract more investment. So this is one of the main points of our document and our policy. Another thing that represents a significant challenge in attracting funding is the financial structuring of the project. We really needed to work on having an economic model and structures that would allow different actors and stakeholders to provide funding and to invest. This was something that was extremely important for the success of our projects. So that's what I wanted to add with regards to challenges and the support that can be provided to the sector, as well as the informal sector in urban transportation.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the closing question would go to you, Diego. What type of financial products and services would be interesting for you as a national bank to be receiving from KfW or AFD?
No, as I said, from technical assistance to invest in technical capacities, because for some municipalities it's difficult to structure a project. So starting from the beginning, and then concessional loans, because as I said, introducing a new technology is quite difficult. So it's difficult for the investor to face or being willing to face some risk. So when you have concessional or some more sophisticated products like liquidity lines, like grants, this is a great solution to make possible a project. So as Stefano and Barbara said, if we work together, I think it's possible to have a better solution and to make possible more projects in many different countries and in many different sectors. So I think those are some of the alternatives, and the good news is that we are already working on that with these guys.
Okay, thank you very much. We made it pretty much right on time. We don't have any questions or time for questions. I see already a few hands, but we are in a very, I would say, informal sector, so you guys can come up and have some discussions if there's any questions or comments. We appreciate the time and the attention from everybody, and especially here, my colleagues here who have given their time to provide these inputs, and we appreciate everybody that tuned in online and came here in person, and we look forward to the rest of the Transforming Transportation. Thank you very much.
And perhaps just a special and perhaps just a special hello and thanks to Eleonore and Sasank from the MYC Secretariat in Brussels. They couldn't be here. Perhaps they hear us, and very special thanks to them.
Thank you.
Perfect closing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.